Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Harry and Lloyd. We're really doing it, aren't we, buddy? Let's start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by This Time. Pick up Jesse Wallace's romantic novel at your favorite Parisian bookstore. This Time is out now. Now time, or something. Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I'm Todd.
And this is a movie podcast for cinephiles, by cinephiles, and also filmmakers, actors, writers, producer, and all the things. We like to do all the things in order to get better at this process, and we bring that lens of experience and aspiration into every movie that we look at and see what can we learn and what can we discover about the whole process. And some movies have more to discover than others, but some are secretly hiding a lot of things within them that may look simple on the outside. And so anyway, what are we going to cover today, man? We're just going to dive straight into this jammer.
Yeah, let's do it. Today we're covering the second of a trilogy called Before Sunset. If you haven't seen this film, please pause this episode and go watch it, because we're going to spoil a lot of stuff, and it's all important stuff. So make sure to watch it.
All the things. We'll touch on a couple of things. We'll look at some of the cinematography and framing. We'll discuss a little bit of the wardrobe and the way they create fresh looks without switching outfits. And we'll talk about some of the directing, changing energy for contrast, some of the blocking. We'll also look at some of the story and writing, the topics of conversation, good excuses to do things, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. 9 years after Jesse and Celine first met, they encounter each other again in Paris on the last stop of Jesse's book tour. Directed by Richard Linklater. Screenplay by Richard Linklater, Julie Delpy, and Ethan Hawke, starring Ethan Hawke as Jesse and Julie Delpy as Celine. That's the easiest one I've done yet.
Yeah.
I was thinking, for me it's better I don't romanticize things as much anymore. I was suffering so much all the time. I still have lots of dreams, but they're not in regard to my love life. It doesn't make me sad, it's just the way it is.
Is that why you're in a relationship with somebody who's never around?
Yes, obviously, I can't deal with the day-to-day life of a relationship. Yeah, we have, this exciting time together, and then he leaves, and I miss him, but at least I'm not dying inside. When someone is always around me, I'm like suffocating.
No, wait, you just said that you need to love and be loved.
Yeah, but when I do, it quickly makes me nauseous. It's a disaster. I mean, I'm really happy only when I'm on my own. Even being alone, it's better than sitting next to a lover and feeling lonely. It's not so easy for me to be a romantic. You start off that way, and after you've been screwed over a few times, you forget about all your delusional ideas and you just take what comes into your life. That's not even true. I haven't been screwed over. I've just had too many blah relationships. They weren't mean, they cared for me, but there were no real connection or excitement. At least not from my side.
God, I'm sorry. Is it really that bad? It's not, right?
It's not even that. I was fine until I read your fucking book. It stirred shit up, It reminded me how genuinely romantic I was, how I had so much hope in things, and now it's like I don't believe in anything that relates to love. I don't feel things for people anymore. In a way, I put all my romanticism into that one night, and I was never able to feel all this again. Like, somehow this night took things away from me, and I expressed them to you, and you took them with you. It made me feel cold, like if love wasn't for me.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
You know what? Reality and love are almost contradictory for me. It's funny. Every single of my exes, then they're married. Men go out with me, we break up, and then they get married. And later they call me to thank me for teaching them what love is, and that I taught them to care and respect women.
I think I'm one of those guys.
I want to kill them. Why didn't they ask me to marry them? I would have said no, but at least they could have asked. But it's my fault. I know it's my fault because I never felt it was the right man. Never. But what does it mean, the right man, the love of your life? The concept is absurd. The idea that we can only be complete with another person is evil, right?
gonna talk?
You know, I guess I've been heartbroken too many times, and then I recovered. So now, you know, from the start, I make no effort because I know it's not going to work out. I know it's not going to work out.
You can't do that. You can't live your life trying to avoid pain at the expense of
you know
engagement.
what? Those are words. I've got to get away from you. Stop the car. I want to get out.
No, don't get out.
It's being
Keep
around
talking.
you, okay?
Hey,
no,
hey.
don't touch me. You know, I want to get on a cab. Monsieur, arrêtez-vous.
Monsieur.
Non, c'est bon, au feu là.
No,
Juste au
don't,
feu,
no,
au coin.
no,
Non, il y
keep
a un
going,
métro même.
It's
great.
I love that she unravels right there about her exes and getting married and after dating and all that stuff, and it's all this like passion, and she's flustered, and it's just all very human. And I think the thing that I really love about it is how it contrasts so well with the first film. I felt like in the first film they were kind of creating this perfect woman, even though she wasn't perfect, but she didn't present as perfect, but we didn't get to see a lot of her flaws and her own issues. She would talk about things that would upset her, but she wouldn't like unravel that way. And so I love that it's a really great contrast from her younger self. And meanwhile, he throughout this movie is a little more put together and mellowed out than he was in the first movie. And so there's still this beautiful contrast that's happening. And that scene, I think she's so good. Anyway, having come from the first movie, and I think this is not the right series to watch back to back to back. I think this movie ages better if you were to like watch one, wait like a year, watch the next one, and then maybe I'll have to see how this, you know, lines up with us watching 3 in a row. But there's all these little imperfections that come out in human memory whenever you have a little bit more time, because you experience this movie the way they're experiencing their original memory if you have that much more time. And so I'm curious, for you, does this play a little bit better than the first one? It's tighter, it's shorter, or does this, you know, just feel a little bit more of the same and you're just like, oh, it's okay, you know, it's a fine little trip?
Yeah, I think it's, you made an excellent point. I would have loved to have seen the first one when it came out and then waited 9 years to see the second one. Like that experience would have been incredible, because then it's age, I've aged with it, right? And with them. Mm-hmm. Linklater is, I mean, when you talk about reality and you talk about making something that's real and that's true and honest to human experience, I don't think there's anybody better. Like, I think that, I mean, if you look at Boyhood, at these films, like the guy just gets it, and whether he gets it or not, I don't know, but putting it on a screen, he's a master of it. And so, you know, if you listen to our last podcast, I liked the first one. Mm-hmm. You know, there wasn't anything that I was like crazy about, but I did like it. But I had said, I think I'll like it more after watching the second or third one or whatever. And I absolutely is the case. And I totally get why this is a seminal thing for you, because you probably experience it the way that I would have wanted to experience it, which is waiting with them and then finding out the things that we find out. Like, what you mentioned before in the last episode about like the scenario that happened 6 months after, right? You don't, even though you know that from the trailer, okay, they didn't end up together. You don't know why. You don't know like what happened. And we find out very early on, they give you that pretty early on that, you know, that he showed up and she didn't. And so, but that is the cornerstone of the reason why they are that they are. You just mentioned it really well. She's less put together than he is, and which is opposite from the first one. The first one, he talks nonstop, doesn't stop talking, like pulls information out of her, right? Mm-hmm. Drags her through the conversation a lot of times, right? I mean, she obviously does the same in ways, yeah. but he's really the impetus of everything. And it feels the opposite in this film, because she has a lot she's wanted to say to him, and he's had to move on because he showed up and she didn't. So it forced him to move on. He got married, he had a kid. So he had to be more put together, whether he liked it or not. But she had no idea if he showed up. She never saw him again. She's dated other men, but at the same time, they don't measure up to the experience she had with him. So she's had to. She gets this unloading of this feeling that she's had for these 9 years in that scene, and it's beautiful because it also coincides. And I felt this when I was watching it. I was like, this is about the time where they actually had sex in the first one. So where their whole journey came to a culmination of interaction, right? Of like, and it was physical, and this time it's emotional, but it's like this build into this basically, lovemaking of expressing what I've wanted to express for the last 9 years. Only before it was the last 9 hours, right? And this is the last 9 years. So, and I just thought that the acting was phenomenal. I even told my wife the next day. I said, I mean, it's obvious. Well, maybe not obvious. I don't know, but it was like very telling that Ethan and Julie were part of the writing of this, right? Because they just felt like they were having a conversation the whole time. It never felt like, in the way that they spoke over each other, interrupted each other, laughed at what the other person just said, was like so real, And even I did notice a few things, like a few cuts were obviously not aligned, like there's one scene where they were walking through a garden and this guy is walking towards them, and then they cut from behind them to in front of them, and the guy doesn't walk past them for another 5 seconds or something. Yeah. And it's an obvious, error, quote unquote, in the cut, but I didn't even care because the conversation they needed that little line to keep the conversation going forward. So were there flaws? Sure. But, I mean, he's trying to keep the conversation real and honest. And so sometimes, I don't know, I forgave him for that because I just thought that the acting, the writing, the directing was just so beautifully done. So wonderful.
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about the writing being all three of them apparently. And it's funny. I thought I'd read this previously, but after putting together the show notes for the last episode and it only had 2 writing credits, I thought maybe I was thinking of something else or I got it wrong. But apparently this was done similar to the way the first one was. And before sunrise, so after we recorded our episode, I went and was looking for behind the scenes articles and photos, and I couldn't find any of that. But I did come across a New York Times article that was written last year where they're discussing the first movie, and they discuss the writing credits being what they are. And to some degree or another, like the writer was implying there was some frustration there, even though I don't think that was displayed by any of the 3 of these people, Ethan, Julie, and Richard. But apparently Richard Linklater and Kim Krazan wrote the blocks of it, like a 30 or 40 page script, so to speak, that was just kind of guide points more than anything. And then Ethan, Julie, and Richard got in a room and for over the course of, I don't know, a couple weeks or so, worked it out. Like they fleshed it out. They put all the actual, meat on the bones, and they didn't get writing credit for that, which is a tricky thing because they're getting writing credit here. But I wonder if they actually wrote anything. Screenplay credits is a very interesting thing because I think by the guild standards, it technically means you actually literally wrote something, not that you just improv'd or said something. And so it can get a little dicey, but I think it's cool based on how much of this movie relies on what they created, the 3 of them. I think it makes total sense that they all 3 get credit.
I'd agree.
Whereas you might work through a scene that the writing says one thing, and even though the scene turns out to be something that only reflects what was the intention of the writing, but all the words are completely different. I don't think that merits a writing credit. Like that's part of the job of an actor, is to get in there and, depending on the needs of the directing and the scene, like to get in there and to create with everybody in there. And so it can get a little dicey whenever you're talking about proper credit and who deserves it. In this case, I think it's 100% merited, especially given that they're walking in with this skeleton of a script, and they're really fleshing out 80 minutes worth of content based on probably 30 pages worth of starting points.
But they technically didn't get writing credit?
Not on the first one, no.
Oh, not on the first one.
Yeah, this one they did.
Ugh,
yeah,
they did.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so
cool.
that felt like
That's crazy.
a writing of a potential wrong. But yeah, it's a weird thing, and I wonder what the guild actually thinks about this kind of scenario, because there's other directors who do similar things. They go in and they're like, this is what I want from the scene, and he collaborates with the actors, and I don't think they usually get credit for it. I want to say Like Crazy is another one of those, my reco from last week, where the director just said, hey, here's my outline, here's the things I want to happen, let's explore and let's improv and discover it together. And I mean, it's all splitting hairs. I think the cool thing is making sure you're partnering with people under the right expectations, and making sure everyone's on the same, plane of existence, so to speak. Because it would be frustrating to step in there as an actor and thinking ahead of time, I'm going to get credit for my work as an inventor here, and you don't. Whereas if you step in with the understanding of, I understand, the stakes and what that means on the at the end of this thing, then you can go in with the proper expectations, and that's everyone's responsibility. The director first, he needs to go in there and set those expectations. But for me, walking into this movie the first time, difficult. On the one hand, I was really excited. On the other hand, it's a lot of trepidation because there's no expectation of a sequel. It's like if someone were to say, hey, Good Will Hunting has a sequel, you'd be like, oh, is it?
Yeah.
Should that have a sequel?
Right.
That was before Sunrise. It has this very open end, and you just don't know. Do they meet in 6 months? I wonder what happens. And I love the beginning of this movie is kind of addressing that trepidation. Right, him with the book and the people all around him asking, well, do they meet? What happens? And he's like, that's eye of the beholder. It kind of reveals, I think, if you're a cynic or romantic, and or
what's the line he said? He said some specific line that was like,
it takes.
I can't remember it.
He's like, to quote my grandfather, to answer that question would take the piss out of the whole thing.
Yes, exactly. I loved that. I thought, oh, okay.
Got it.
I see what this is doing.
And it's a clever out to almost kind of wink at the viewer and say, look, I know you're nervous about getting answers to some of these questions, but and that's okay. It's okay to be like a little nervous about that. But guess what? You're going to get them.
Yeah.
And so walking in, I was like, it's so easy to ruin something by building on it, because as much as we would like, a great movie, Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 to exist on their own thing, like what happens in Godfather 3 could potentially change everything in the way you view the first two movies. And those are completely different circumstances. But walking into this one, whatever he does, you're building on top of this other thing, and it could really affect the way we view Jesse, and retroactively make me love or hate the first movie more. And so that's a scary prospect walking into this thing, but walking out, I was just thrilled. I was like, yes, that all makes sense. I buy into all of that. And I love that one of the big topics of conversation was, it was almost the center of this movie was the last movie, right? And it's the overriding thing that kind of guides all their conversation. It's underlying everything they say or don't say. It's just kind of the ghost in the room. What really happened that night and what happened after and what's happened since. And I appreciate that he just didn't ignore it, but he didn't paint a perfect picture either. Like there was humans involved, and therefore everything is tinted with flaws and imperfections. And it haunts both of them in completely different and yet similar ways. And I think you said it so well in ways that I hadn't, thought of. I didn't really connect how what he did certainly changed who he is and made him a more sober human being. Whereas for her, because of exactly like what you said, because of what she didn't do, it's haunted her, and it's unraveled her in some ways, and also made her braver in other ways. Like she is an activist, and that's her line of work. And so in some ways, I'm sure it pushed her subconsciously to just, what does anything matter if I just go for it? Like there's nothing left to lose if I've already kind of lost, this one special thing anyway. You can just kind of feel these motives underlying everything and every piece of the conversation. It really worked for me. And that's a hard thing to do.
I know. And what better way to bring him back to Paris than a book tour? I mean, think about it. Like, he has a wife and he has a kid. So what would he be doing in Paris by himself? Right. Well, it'd probably be for some kind of work. But, if he's like, I don't know, working in oil or like he's a lawyer or something, like that's like bland and boring. And that's not, that wouldn't align with like, the character he was in the beginning, which was this, very romantic, like open, like let's talk kind of character. So write a book, right? And he's not happy in his marriage. So yeah, write a book about this girl that you met, or this person that you met on a train years ago, this one experience, right? To find her. He said it, and he said that in the movie. I in a way, I wrote this to find you. And then, all these other things that you find out in the film, like she lived in New York the same time he did at some point, and he thought he saw her at one point, and all these other things, her quote unquote forgetting that they had sex, and then later on revealing, oh, we did it twice. Of course I remember, like it was just, even though there not a ton happened, like the way that they introduce and give you new information throughout is so organic and real, and which is really hard to do when you just have two people talking, because there has to be some kind of boring parts, but they're not boring, right, but kind of parts where you're just talking about nothing that really, that us as a viewer really cares about. When they're sitting in the coffee shop and they're smoking, at some point I was like, okay, can we talk about the elephant in the room, please? Like, let's stop this banter. But it was necessary to be real. It was necessary for it to feel like an actual conversation between people who were legitimately interested in each other and what they've been doing for the last 9 years. It would be ridiculous to go just straight into, where they left off 9 years ago. That's not how human beings work. And I thought that they just rode that line really perfectly.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I really loved about the directing on this front is there's some energy shifts that happen because you have this kind of higher energy moment of the coffee shop and even the walk and talk on their way to the boat. And that allows something to happen because once we're on the boat, she's talking a lot and he's just listening quietly. And it's this slower energy. He's very still, and that contrast lets the moment open up, like really open up and connect the viewer as he's connecting to her. There's kind of this old adage of a good mixtape is rises and falls. And it's allowing things to breathe, but it doesn't feel like it's breathing if everything's breathing all the time. And so you need these ebbs and flows, these higher rhythms and bigger other related things in order to kind of dial down, settle in, and now let's have a serious moment. One of the first things I learned from one of my first acting coaches was about a good monologue, and a good monologue has an arc. You don't start at a 10, super emotional and super upset. You start at a 2. You work your way up there, and that way that contrast allows something more dramatic to unfold. And so Linklater's doing a really fantastic job of kind of guiding the energy throughout this film so that we begin in these innocuous moments that aren't really talking about the thing that they're really thinking about. And in doing that, you allow this space to develop for this other thing to unfold, so that you can kind of settle in and like, yes, finally, let's really talk about it. Y'all hinted at it, and now we can feel there's, you know, some frustration, but we haven't really heard the limits of that frustration. Whenever he talks about that on the boat, right, he's like, you know, I think I know for sure now that I did write this book in order to find you, so that I could track you down and ask you, why the F weren't you there?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, so good. So good, because he didn't at first, when she realizes that, oh my God, he was there, which was right early on. He's trying to play it cool because he doesn't want to make her feel bad. He just met her again, and he just wants this meeting to be good, right? To be positive. And then as it goes on and he realizes, holy crap, I love this woman, you know, he starts getting upset. And you could tell in that line, he just gives her one line, you know. And the earlier his character in the first film would have been much more aggressive. He was a very aggressive dude, and now he's chill and laid back. He gives her that one line, why the fuck weren't you there? And then that's really it. And then he also, I think, if I recall, in the lines after, he, like, you know, kind of like, you know, relaxes it a little bit. He says, why the fuck weren't you there? And then, you know, kind of says a few things to just ease her mind. I just wanted to get that out. Like, let me just, why the fuck weren't you there? And then back up, you know, a little bit. Just to let her know, like, that changed my life. You changed my life by meeting you, and then you changed my life by not showing up. And he understands. Yeah. He understands why, but at the same time, it's like, God dang it, life, right?
Yeah.
Life will find a way to screw things up or to what you think screw things up. But, you know, they also address the point. God, it's so brilliant. The writing is so brilliant. They also address the point of she does. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe we would have hated each other, you know, if we would have ended up together that night. We would have given each other numbers, and, like, if I would have shown up 6 months later, and, you know, 9 years later, we would just be, you know, that old couple that is not really interested in each other anymore. And maybe there's nothing to say that wouldn't be the case, right? Maybe it is better, and life was supposed to happen this way, where they meet 9 years later to make sure. Are you still into this person 9 years later? They've changed, they've grown, they've evolved into this. Do you still want this? And then at the end, it was just the way I remember. Okay, when I was watching it, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go off because I just love it so hard. When I was watching it at the end, I moved my mouse because I had to watch it on my computer. I moved my mouse and I was like, there's like 3 minutes left in this movie. How are they going to end this right now? This is ridiculous. And for her to say what she's been saying, you know, almost the entire movie, you're going to miss your flight. You're going to miss your flight. And him just to answer, I know. Fade to black. Like, oh my God. It just gives you all the answers you wanted right there in one little line. So good. It's so good.
Such a good point. And it's a complete 180 from the first film, right? Where they let travel plans interrupt maybe their destiny together. He's like, well, I'm not allowing my flight, because it was a flight the first time too. He wasn't going to allow another flight to interrupt this relationship. And the other thing, just to rewind back to whenever they're first talking about whether or not he showed up, the other brilliant part about that writing is the way they handle it is to say that he didn't show up either. And that's so good. It allows you to experience both things. It's kind of Schrodinger's, train station. Like, he both did and didn't arrive.
Yes.
And getting to experience both of those realities is pretty satisfying, to see how she responds to the idea that he didn't show up, and then getting to feel like the pain of him showing up. And then you also get to experience through his eyes what would have happened if she had shown up, right? Because he talks about, I wrote the book ending, except, in this one, you actually showed up, and we had sex for 10 days straight, and, everything's amazing, and blah, blah, blah. And so you really get all the endings that are possible through Linklater's eyes, at least, and maybe even through Ethan and Julie's, and that's so brilliant to kind of scratch all those itches. And I love it for that.
Great point. Great point about because and it was an ending, right, that the publisher didn't want. Right. So, but they bring it up in conversation as like does exist somewhere.
Yeah.
In some alternate universe, this ending to the book and maybe this ending in real life does exist. And I just want to address that.
Yeah.
Right. And you do get to feel that. It's brilliant. Yeah.
So good. I have a few questions for you that I'll save for a little bit. Cinematography wise, the first frames, last frames was kind of interesting because it's a little bit of a reverse from the first movie. In the first movie, we begin on the train, end on the train, and right before the end of the film, right, we montage through all the places they'd been. Complete opposite here. We open on all the places they will be in reverse. So we begin at her house and then montage of the city, right? We're on the boat. We see the boat. We see the kind of garden wall trellis thing. We see the cafe, and then we see some streets. And I think we end at the bookstore where our story begins. And then we kind of slowly walk back through all those things. And of course, the last shot is her dancing in her apartment, and he's watching. It's a kind of a reverse shot moment of him watching her dancing in her apartment as we kind of just fade to black. And so I wouldn't say that there's a strong, first frame, last frame in this, but there is a strong way that it's talking to the last movie, and the way in the use of the montage and the cityscapes. And so that's pretty cool. Framing wise, and this first part about framing might be more incidental than anything, but there's something that's kind of happening on the way from the bookstore to the cafe as they're walking. The framing is interesting to me because there's a slight centering or at least favoring of whoever is talking, or at least whoever's story is the focal point. So it's, it starts with Jesse talking about his life, and he's kind of framed. He's on the left of the frame, but the frame is kind of leaning towards him. So he's not like dead center, but she's edged out a little bit, and he's a little bit more closer to the center. And then at about the halfway point on that walk, they switch places. She becomes to the left, and he goes to the right. And she's once again now telling her story, and she's framed a little bit heavier towards the center than he is. And that could have just been the camera op leaning that way, or it could have been the subtle direction from Linklater. I don't know, but I thought it was interesting. Another framing thing that I thought was great was in the car ride, the chauffeur, the little limo ride to her place. The coverage in this is pretty strong. We have clean singles of him and her. And a clean single just means there's nobody else in the frame, because normally a dirty single would be like an over the shoulder. You're looking at them, but you can kind of see the other character, a little bit of their shoulder or hair in the foreground blurred out. In this case, these are clean singles, just them by themselves. But there's also like this master shot of like this two shot of them in the same frame. And I like it because in the car ride, you can ultimately the coverage allows a lot of emotional strings to pull during editing, because throughout this scene, we're cutting in between these clean singles, which I think creates a bit of a wall between them. And it's them in their own heads, and then they're separate worlds. But then when we go back to that two shot, it kind of brings them back together. So as she's expressing her frustration over, what his book did to her, and the revelations that it kind of brought to her in her own life, and the first, chaos to some degree, we're in singles there, and we're seeing her in her own world, and he can't reach out to her. He can't get to her. And he's like, can I say something now? Can I talk now? She's just, raving. And it's a beautiful way to give your edit a lot of options. And it's so different from the first movie, that the first film, there's a lot of dirty singles. There's a lot of, over the shoulder shots, and they're constantly connecting in the first film, whether it's through those dirty singles or through, these wider shots that have them both in the frame. They're always connected in that first movie. And here they're kind of fighting to connect and to be in each other's world. And that's all through the composition and choosing those shots. And it's nice. And I will talk about a little bit more on that here in a second. Cinematography wise though, there's a lot more tools and I think tricks, maybe not a lot more, but a few more. Like there's this crane move from above the stairs whenever they're walking from the bookshop to the cafe. There's this beautiful crane move where we're just kind of hovering over them as it, cranes around, tracking their conversation. We're like, I don't know, 30, 40 feet at least in the air.
Or lack of conversation.
Yeah, or lack of.
I don't really talk walking up very much. It's like this like feeling of, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Walking on glass a little bit. I've been talking this whole time. I'm not going to say anything to ruin this right now. But yeah, no, I remember thinking that, like, what are they doing? This is crazy.
This is wild. There's also the boat ride. And crap, I forgot to hit play. But on the boat ride, it kind of suddenly occurred to me that there's a little bit of a glow to that scene. And I wasn't sure if it's in the entire movie or just mostly in that sequence, or if it's just brought out more in that sequence. But maybe there's like this pro mist filter kind of thing that they added. There's other types of ways to get this effect. Like I think Stockings is one of those things that old school filmmakers would put like between the lens and the camera. You might throw like some stockings on there, and it just makes the lights bloom a little bit more. It gives us this kind of dreamy, hazy effect. And yeah, it's just kind of an emotional filter that you're not grounded anymore. There's a dreamy, out of this world, outside of my body kind of feeling that it begins generating in the viewer. And it's like a place outside of time. And it's certainly on that boat ride, I think it's there. Or maybe in the entire film. Anyway. And on the chauffeur ride, this is just me thinking to myself, I was wondering if maybe they had a polarizer because there's the back window, I'm not seeing a ton of reflection, and it just seemed like an obvious thing you'd probably want to do to make sure you kill as much camera and boom op and whoever else is crammed, in the front two seats of the car. Yeah. And so a polarizer kind of helps can help kill a lot of those reflections. And wardrobe wise, this is something that occurred to me in the first film, and we ran out of time. And they do it a little bit here, but they do it a lot in the first film, which is layers. Dress your actors in layers, and by doing that allows you to refresh your look throughout the film. And so, for instance, in this one, they're both wearing jackets, right? And they go to coffee and they sit down for coffee. They take the jackets off, and now you can see what they're wearing underneath. And so that just allows, a little bit of a visual refreshing to happen, right? She has her, and whenever they leave, he puts his jacket back on, she leaves hers off. And you could even use that as a bit of armor, right? She's maybe pulling her armor off and he's putting his back on, he's got to protect himself. I don't know. There might be some of that. I would imagine that would come more from Ethan and Julie than Richard, but probably a conversation about what does the clothing mean to them and their character and how they're experiencing this day. I would want to approach it that way. Like he's feeling a little vulnerable. He needs to like put something on to cover himself and protect himself. And then two, she has her hair up, right? And during the coffee scene, she lets her hair down, and now we have another visual interest thing that's happening. She has a purse, and then when they start walking, she slings it over her shoulder, and now it kind of has this belt look, right? That's strapping across her body. And then when they get on the boat, it also keeps her blouse in place whenever the wind starts blowing. So that seemed both practical for wardrobe reasons, and also like a way to visually interest things. But to me, I think it's important that they're refreshing their look in this movie, because this is a movie where things are happening continuously. This is like one uncut moment of their life. This is an hour and 15 minutes of their life. And so it seems important to have little ways of creating visual interest along the way, so that you're just trying to break things up and not let it get too stale. This kind of brings me into a lot of the directing and performance stuff, right? There's not a lot of montages. There's no montages really outside of that beginning sequence. There's no montages, no time lapses. This is all taking place in real time. And there's a lot more coverage and edits than there were in the first movie. And I think that's to keep visual interest going and to be less taxing to the viewer. I think because the first movie inserted these little music sequences and breaths that happened along the way throughout their night, because they spend probably a good, 12 to 15 hours together before they break apart. And here, this is all, they need to kind of keep the conversation moving. You can't just take a break and then have 2 hours pass by. He's got a flight to catch. This is all put together very meticulously. And in order to kind of keep that going, you want to give the viewer some reprieve in these scenes, because if you suddenly start doing a bunch of oneers, you're going to exhaust your viewer, because edits allow your viewer to kind of reset and to think and to break up some of the visual monotony. That's really important in this kind of oneer setup. And they have like two, I think, brief moments of silent walking, right? When she walks to the front of the boat, he's on the phone. And then when they're walking up the stairs to her place, right, there's this kind of silent mood that's kind of overtaking them. Like, I'm walking up to your place. This could mean a lot of things. But there's something happening in the ether between them. And that's awesome. Yeah. Blocking wise, this is on a bigger level because of the nature of the film, that it's kind of one unbroken moment. They need to connect all these places together, right? You need to be able to basically look at a map and say they walk from here to here to here to here, and drive to here and walk to here, and that's that. And you need to all time it out and say, this is all, here's every conversational bit that's going to happen. And you also need to have a transition of, we're getting off the boat and we need to now have a conversation that happens, that ends and begins exactly when that happens. Like, there's a lot to consider with all of that. But the way they shot this, I think, is really smart, because they really only need to connect a few things visually, find a couple places to cut, and you can kind of cheat your way through these things. If you say, I really want to use this coffee shop, and I really want to use this boat, and I want to use this bookstore, you can cheat all that. For all we know, those are 3 completely different places in the city. So visually, you only really need to do a few things, and in order to find the right place to cut and begin your next scene. And so like the bookshop to the cafe, that seems pretty connected, but maybe there's a few places to cheat the location through an edit, through some of this reverse angle edits. And I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised though if they found that whole thing, like the bookshop is here, the cafe is here, we can do all that. It's about a 12-minute walk. We need 12 minutes of conversation that begins and ends around this kind of thing. Because they walk into the coffee shop and that's continuous.
Yeah.
They say hello to the baristas. They go take their seat and it's all moving, clicking, like it's freaking beautiful. And from the cafe, now we need to connect the cafe to the garden to the boat. And that anything can happen there, because we go from the cafe to a stairwell and then we cut. We go from a stairwell, it doesn't have to be the same one. We go from a stairwell to the garden, and from the garden, we go back down some other steps and then we cut. That garden could be, 10 miles away from where the boat is. But now all you really need to do is find you can pick up anywhere. Like, hey, we need to be 7 minutes walking distance from the boat. Great. Let's block this thing in reverse. Let's play the scene out. Okay, we'll start here and we'll walk it forward now. And from the boat can drop you off wherever. It doesn't matter because a car is going to come pick you up anyway. And through some of those edits, like you could probably even cheat that. Like the boat could start, 7-hour trip away for all we know. All you need to do is make sure you find your moment to transition between these locations and work out your timing. So I can imagine they spent, 2 days, shooting that scene, maybe even 5, like depending on how free he wants to be in making this thing. You could have shot this in like 5 or 10 days, or 60. Like it just depends on how much he wanted to control the performances, I think, more than anything. The blocking on the boat ride could have been staged around highlighting certain buildings, right? Notre Dame is right there, and certain views, right? And just as a way to keep refreshing the visual interest, again, trying to keep the audience engaged visually in any way you can in order to keep you engaged in their conversation and their relationship. And then, of course, you can block it so that we also know when we're arriving at our destination, right? Say, hey, I want y'all to start walking to the front of the boat during XYZ line so that the camera can watch us docking and pulling up. And it feels so real and it's so immersive to do it that way, because now when he's ending his conversation, she can be like, hey, let's get off now. I'm like, shut up. And it feels like two people just inhabiting things. And that's what their performances are, right? They're so engaged with each other and they're listening and they're waiting, reacting, trampling their lines. And it goes back to, what we've been saying this whole time of them partnering to work on this thing together, is very lived in. And you can see I feel like I can see how they've grown as actors, over the preceding 9 years. They were already incredible actors, and they've just, slightly evolved, and you can feel it as they're interpreting their characters and probably the way they're inserting their own lives into the dialogue and their mannerisms and all those kinds of things.
But to be so aware of the 9 years that have passed in their character evolvement is just so, it's not seen super often. I mean, it's something that could be easily missed, easily overlooked, but to do that whole kind of like flipping their vibe kind of thing where she talks all the time now and she's the one who's losing it and he's got it more. It's just so really, really smart, because then you're on your toes as a viewer too, because you thought you knew him, you thought you knew her, but we together are learning, how they've evolved. It's just so cool, which was so much better than if they were the same. Yeah. Because why would they be the same?
Right. Story and writing wise, like the topics I found interesting, not just, all their history stuff, but also they kind of talk about the one thing that they never really discuss in the first film, and which is their countries of origin, right? He's American, she's French. They lightly touch on it in the beginning and the end, right? He makes this comment about, yeah, I get it, I'm the crude American who doesn't appreciate other cultures, blah, blah, blah. But hey, I'm trying. And he tells that story about trying to buy a ticket and how he just completely failed. And she talks about in the first film how she's projecting her impression of the way he's going to view their interaction, like of, yeah, I get it. You go back to America and you tell your friends about how you had sex with this French girl and blah, blah, blah. And so there's that aspect of it, but they don't really talk about their countries. And here they do. They finally discuss their home countries, right? American imperialism and French men. And I just love that they explored this topic that was untouched during their first encounter, even though to these two people, it might be the most obvious topic, right? Where you grew up and how you grew up and the way you view each other's cultures and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
But it felt less like, and that was okay to me because it felt less like a writer slash director is trying to make a statement and more about two people just talking about natural things that would come up. Does that make sense? Because in most
Yeah.
films, it feels like that. It feels like, oh, this guy is trying to make a statement with this movie. That didn't feel that way.
Great point. Completely agree. And that's usually what does happen. But here, yeah, it just felt like, hey, Julie, what do you think? Like, who do you think your character turned out to be, and why, and how does that impact the way you see Jesse now? And yeah, it felt organic and absolutely natural, and not with pretense, and digested, perspectives about the world. It felt pretty genuine. I love when they leave the cafe, that whole sequence of imperialism, whatever. I love that the motivation was not, hey, do you want to go walk around for old time's sake? That would have just killed me. It's like, oh, that's just lazy. But instead, what he does is he uses the looming journey right through airports and airplanes in order to explore Paris. He's like, hey, I wanted to see Paris a little bit while I'm here. And they do. And that's so much more satisfying because it just doesn't reek of opportunism of the first film. There's so many other ways you can take advantage of the first film, but don't do that. Don't make this movie so obviously representing the first film, because we're already expecting it. We're already here for it. You don't need to milk it. Like, find something else. And that felt like a very genuine, realistic thing to say to someone, for someone who's about to like spend 10 hours, on a flight or whatever. He probably does want to walk around a little bit and just not be sitting down. Also love her skewed memory of events, even though to some degree she's, playing possum. Leading up to that, there are still other moments where she probably does forget a little bit here and there. And I love that the events are imperfect in her head, because that's what happens with memory. We have imperfect recall of the past, and as time passes, our memory shifts around a little bit, and that yellow car becomes a green car or whatever. And he makes this great little comment, right? A memory is never finished as long as you're alive. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. My last couple thoughts were about the chauffeur, right? I love, and they do this in the first film and it still works for me. Maybe some people are a little nauseous of it by now, but I love how when they're not looking, the other one kind of reaches out for them.
I just love that, but doesn't touch them and like pulls their hand back before the other one sees it. It's amazing.
So good.
It's amazing physical representation of their emotional state.
Yes. 100% that. The Waltz, there's this great little reflection of Jesse that happens after she sings this beautiful song. He is walking over to pick out like a CD or something. And he says, do you just plug the name in for every guy that comes up here? And it's so good because it's a great callback to his suspicious nature in the first film, right? Where he just doesn't think genuine things happen. He thinks people have ulterior motives, and they kind of abuse trust. But by contrast, he doesn't press it, and the tone of what he's saying is completely different from the tone of the first film. And it just kind of reflects his maturing or sober nature. Yeah, and I just really appreciate that. Yeah,
that's a great point, because that speaks to the acting in an incredible way, because so easily that delivery could have been a little more curt, or a little bit more, curt's the wrong word, a little bit more accusatory of, you don't really feel this for me, or do you? I am insecure and I need for you to verify that is actually about me and not about anybody else. And yet in this case, it felt more like just like a joke, because she doesn't really answer.
Nah.
And he doesn't, and like you said, he doesn't press it. It's just like, and then he just, puts on a piece of music. So Nina, oh man.
Nina, my God.
Yeah.
I heard a little story about Nina. I wonder if that was like Julie's actual story.
Probably. Right.
It felt
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it felt completely genuine. It was either hers or Richard's, but I bet her being a French, I assume she's French, Parisian, actor out there in tune with the arts. I can imagine she went. And then on top of that, I think Nina Simone had passed away not long before filming this. And so it was probably on everyone's mind. And it's like, oh, I have a great memory about Nina Simone, actually, and blah, blah, blah. It just becomes part of the film. Beautiful.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, I think that's all I got. So
It's all good stuff, man.
do you, and this is very off the beaten path here, because they go to that little coffee shop and she's like, yeah, this is, my favorite shop, or whatever she says. Do you have a favorite coffee shop?
I mean, I guess not really. There's a shop that I've been to out here. I forget what it's called, but it's in downtown San Rafael, and it's where what's his name? Or it's Mill Valley, downtown Mill Valley, where George Lucas goes a lot, and they have like these just next door to it. They have a statue of Yoda and Indiana Jones in I don't know, whatever, just next to it. But he goes there a lot apparently, and they have live music there every day. Every day that I've been there, they've had a guy in the corner playing guitar or something like that, or a full band. I've been there a few times, and so I would say that place because they also have really good food.
Ooh.
I forget what it's called though. So
Nice.
You?
I'd love to check that out while I'm there. Yeah, I don't know that I have a favorite. There's certainly some favorites. Like I used to really like Dominican Joe's. I like lazy coffee shops where you just have furniture all over the place, and the less coordinated it is, the better. And I thought it was just funny that Linklater has a little comment from Jesse about, I wish they had more of these, around where I came from, because Austin is filled with like these little cozy coffee shops. And
call out.
Yeah, a little call out. So I don't know. Dominican Joe's was always great. I don't even know if it's still operating. Benu, in town is very much that epoch coffee. I think one of my favorites though was running around Ireland a couple years ago. I settled in this place in Galway called Rise and Grind, and it's just this cool little coffee run by some women over there, and they have really cool spots, and I just posted up there for like a week editing some projects, and yeah, it's hard to beat a nice little cozy spot.
That's cool. I mean, yeah, I actually, if I had to pick one in the world that I've been to, it's probably Benu. And I would say, now that I think you mentioned Benu, I was like, oh yeah, because I used to live on the east side, right by the first one. Now they have multiple. Yeah. But I remember when that opened, and we knew the owners really well. They were there every moment of every day because they just opened, and it was whaterful over on the east side, and then so, and it was so cool. Jenny like worked on her thesis, or her whatever master's thesis or whatever, while she was going to school at UT there. So she was, before we had kids, she'd go there all the time.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
So good.
Speaking of Jenny, so there's a lot of romantic things happening in this film, right? Long walks, boat rides, blah blah blah. My question to you is, what's the most romantic outing you've had with Jenny? Ooh, no pressure.
Oh my God.
It doesn't have to be anything like over the top. It can be simple, or maybe it is over the top. Maybe y'all done a balloon ride over, Istanbul, for all I know. I
mean, it's hard. We don't get out as much as we'd like to now, having kids. It's like so expensive. You got to go out when you have kids. It's more, I would say they're all very similar. Because we're very homebody, and so we like to us, like just having a dinner where we don't have kids screaming in our ears, even if we're at home, that's romantic. It might seem boring, but to us, it's like just any time that we get a chance to like talk to each other without interruption is wonderful. Actually, right now, on Fridays, she doesn't have to go into work until like 1 o'clock. And so I block out time from my day and we go to get coffee and to get a bagel every Friday. And to me, and that's, so we just sit down and we just talk, and sometimes it's about, man, we miss home, we miss Austin a lot. And sometimes it's about, man, it's so beautiful here, or, high school kids are very difficult, or I'm so blessed that I have this job, or whatever. It's just a way to reconnect. And so for us, like, that's the most romantic that we get, which might sound boring, but it's an opportunity. And anytime that you take advantage, when you don't have a lot of them, of an opportunity where you have two people who are very busy and very pulled apart, and you say, I'm breaking, and I'm doing this with you. Like, all of a sudden that becomes much more romantic than if we were to go on a hot air balloon ride, which would be adventurous, but not, I don't know. She would never do that ever. She would never do that. But yeah, so I think, but if I'm talking about the most romantic thing, and I mean, it probably, well, there's a couple that I can't talk about, but I mean, our honeymoon was amazing. We went to Disney World and then to Vegas, and that was 11 years ago. So sounds like we haven't been romantic, but we have. But that, just, yeah, I would say that, our honeymoon.
Nice. Very cool.
Good question.
Last one. So Celine's mother, and for the record, I'm pretty much in the same ballpark as you. Like, to me, there's nothing better than just a conversation. Almost doesn't matter.
And yet another thing we agree with.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So Celine's grandmother passes away, and that was her whole like reason for not showing up and missing their piece of destiny. But she talks about being at the funeral and, looking at her and seeing her hands and how small she's gotten. And so you may not have been to, funerals. I don't know. But I'm wondering, at funerals, do you view the body and say goodbye or not?
I do not. That's not the person. In fact, I've told Jenny when I go, I don't want it to be an open casket. Like, you saying goodbye to my body is not, it might bring, maybe it'll bring peace to you, but why? It doesn't make any sense. If you died, I don't want to see your body in a casket. That's not you. What I want to do is I want to go watch a bunch of movies and see you in the films. I want to watch these podcasts and reconnect with you that way. That's a much more honest and real way to do it. Like, experience the things you experienced with the person when they were alive, or, just be with them in your head. And, so no, I have no desire to see anybody in a casket. What about you? That's a great question.
Completely agree. And it's funny the way I kind of arrived at that. Growing up, I went to a lot of funerals. Like, people were always dying, classmates, teachers, family members. Like, I just went to endless funerals. And at one point, a classmate of a good friend of my brother's passed away, car wreck. And we go to the funeral, and or the viewing, it wasn't even the funeral yet. And I'm back there with my neighbor, Teresa, and I go, say goodbye, see his body, and go back, take my seat, and she's still back there. And I turn around, looking at her, and like, are you gonna go, say goodbye? And she's like, no, I have him up here. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And at the time, I'm like, I don't know, 12, maybe 13. And 6 months later, she passed away.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Murdered by a cop. And that's when I decided I'm not going to go look, because this is what she wanted. And ever since then, I don't go view them. And I think y'all had it right. I'm like, yeah, that's not how I'm going to remember you. That's not who you were. And everything that you are is now part of me. And so, yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's, a beautiful way to move forward, instead of, having like, it's like, oh, hey, did you enjoy your 5-star meal and the dessert and your coffee afterwards? And okay, great. Hold on, we got one more thing. Shove all this dirt in your mouth. Like that's not a way to end things. But everyone has their own thing. I'm not judging anybody who approaches life differently. But that's the way I kind of look at it. It's like I don't want to like leave this beautiful memory with dirt in my mouth. That's not it.
I mean, yeah, you don't want your final memory of someone, especially if it's someone that you knew well, that you loved, like to be a lifeless, corpse, right? Like, why would you want that? It doesn't make any sense to me at all in any capacity. And I mean, what I was going to ask you is, do you think that her grandmother would have wanted her to be at her funeral, or would have wanted her to go to be at the train station?
That's interesting. I can't remember.
We don't know her grandmother, but she talks about her a little bit in the film.
She does, and I can't remember enough about her grandmother to quite put my finger on her temperament. But the idealist in me is like, no, she would have wanted her to go take off and, go live your life. And I've tried to live my life that way, actually. Not living my life in a way that binds me to things that are temporary anyway. Like the odds of me living somewhere in order to be close to family is less important to me than pursuing my life and my dreams and doing the things that bring me personal fulfillment. Because I think not doing that, not chasing my dreams and personal fulfillment would make me bitter towards the people that I'm sacrificing for.
Without them even asking you to do it.
Exactly. And so, that's the way I view her grandmother, is that she would want her to go and pursue her life and chase her, her whatever dreams, destiny.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, because we don't have a lot of information on her grandma, I picture her being a little bit like Celine.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, or Celine like her.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway, cool. Good questions, man.
Nice. Cool. So what you going to recommend? Or before we do that, any predictions for what happens in Before Midnight?
None. I don't know. I think that they end up together, obviously, from the last line of the movie. But I have no idea. Okay. None. And judging from, what I had expected from the last one to this one and how wrong I was, or right in some cases, I guess, I really don't even want to venture a guess. I just want to experience it. So
nice. Very cool. What are you going to recommend this week?
So I can't believe that we haven't recommended this before, because it's such an amazing movie. And it's an Ethan Hawke film, and I think you can guess it. Maybe you can guess it. Maybe you can't guess it.
Before the Devil Knows You're Dead?
No. But it's an incredible film.
Oh, wait. No, never mind.
That takes place in a single day.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And amazingly written, amazingly acted, amazingly shot, and Training Day. I'm going to recommend, because it was the first time I'd seen a movie and not the first time, but one of the first times I'd seen a movie and not seen the making of it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't see any camera work. I didn't see any lighting. I didn't see any acting. I just literally saw communication between two dudes. And then the story unfolding the way it does, just unbelievable. And Ethan Hawke is like, dude puts on a clinic. And I mean, obviously Denzel Washington does too. That goes without saying. That guy cannot do any wrong. But man, it put him in a whole new category for me. I think when I saw that film, I was like, this guy. I mean, I would watch anything he does.
Yeah.
So.
That's so funny, because right before starting the podcast, I was thinking about Training Day and Denzel. Like literally as I was fixing my tea, that's still hot. I was thinking about it and some other ways, and I was like, man, we should probably cover that at some point.
We should,
because I really love Antoine Fuqua. I think he's absolutely fantastic. So, and we talked about that a little bit on The Guilty. If you're a premium, if you're a Patreon member, then you probably heard our stuff on that. And we have other things cooking for that. Yeah. It's I'm going to recommend Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. If you like good conversation and drama and people evolving, I think that's just, I always struggle to name my favorite classic film because I oscillate between Lawrence of Arabia and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I think they're just both fantastic, and for two completely different reasons. But Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is absolutely incredible. And yeah, check it out. I won't say anything else about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So stay tuned for next week. We will finally come to the end of the trilogy of the Before trilogy called Before Midnight, the final movie. TBD if it's the final one ever or just the final one for now. Yeah. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe, drop us a review on iTunes or wherever you are able to. And feel free to leave us a note if there's something you want us to talk about or a movie to cover, the kinds of things you find interesting. We don't talk a lot about wardrobe. We did on this episode, but maybe you really like the idea of discussing wardrobe, and we can take another look at that. Maybe find someone who does wardrobe and get their perspective on a film. I don't know. And awesome. If you want to leave a note on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/before sunset.
And we'll leave you with a quote of the day from Nina Simone. I love this. Did you know that the human voice is the only pure instrument? That it has notes no other instrument has. It's like being between the keys of a piano. It's so unbelievably accurate. It's scary because I've been getting into synthesis a lot lately over the past, 6 months, a year. And I love it. I adore it. It's very expensive to get into, but at the same time, it has made me appreciate sound, right? And the creation of sound a lot more because I've had to understand what is attack, what is decay, what is sustain, and what's the difference between sustain and decay, all of these things, oscillators and stuff. And I still don't fully grasp it. I think it's just like something that, you kind of have to spend a lot of time with, right? And really want to learn about. But in essence, the goal of it is to be able to do things that a human voice can do, right? The whole goal, you have an oscillator that goes up and down to make sound, right? Which is the same thing. But then you also have things that can affect that, that can then move by themselves, right? Between the notes and stuff. And nothing stands out like a human voice does. No matter what instrument is playing, a human voice will always take precedent, even if it's in the background, even if it has a bunch of reverb and is way down in the mix. You will always hear a human voice, unless you affect it to the point where you can't tell that it's a human voice, but it will always jump out at you. And I think that speaks to a lot. One, that we want to hear that. We want to relate to humanity in sound or in music or in any capacity, but also that it's just special, that nothing else can do what it can do, that it can be, A sharp minor, and be plus or minus 15 cents, or whatever. It can do all these things and then flawlessly move into something that is spot on. And having her, one of the greatest vocalists of all time, say something like that, just, you got to believe it. It's true. It's true. Where did you find this?
I was just, whenever they started talking about Nina, I was like, I need to just find something that she said. And she has so many great quotes. And this one just struck me because talking about the human voice as an instrument is really interesting in the context of a movie. We have all these people walking around talking, and those are instruments. That's music of a different sort, and I just love that idea that, the actors aren't just performing, dialogue. They're to some degree or another singing to each other and for the audience. Yeah.
Love it. Great call. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been a really great episode. I learned a lot from all of your notes, man. Like, for real. I can't wait for the next one because I haven't seen it. So very excited. But thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe, review us on iTunes, all that good stuff, and let us know if there's a film that you'd like us to cover. We'll probably do it. But we'd love to hear from you either way. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.
Your arm's broke.